Hello and welcome to the second Daily Planet of today. Today is all about challenges, and nothing is more challenging than the controversial subject of geoengineering, deliberate large-scale interventions to alter the Earth's climate. Grandiose folly for some, an essential solution for others. We debate the pros and cons. Geoengineering is deeply controversial. All sorts of wacky ideas are out there, but perhaps there are some genuinely practical ones too. So how do you sift the good from the bad? And how do you make sure that if someone does go ahead with a geoengineering scheme, it doesn't have severe unwanted side effects? There'll be more of that later in the programme. Also coming up, we meet some of the students and early career scientists who are sharing their work in the many poster sessions around the conference. And we find out how one of the most innovative ways of working at Planet Under Pressure has been going. The World Cafe, it seems, has been a huge hit. But first, let's get to the heart of what this Planet Under Pressure conference is all about. This is a science conference where scientists from a wide range of disciplines have come together to deliver a truly important message to the world's leaders when they meet in Rio de Janeiro in June for Rio+20. That message, wake up, the need for action now is really urgent, and here's what you can do based on good science. I'm joined now by the conference's chief scientific advisor, Professor Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize-winning economist. Elinor, a very warm welcome to the Daily Planet.
Thank you.
What should the message be that comes from this conference to the Rio+20 meeting in June? What must the world's scientists say to the world's politicians and world's leaders?
Well, that there are actions that need to be taken, and there's absolutely no question. If we are ignoring the impacts, the negative impacts on the planet, we don't have very much chance of probably one more generation, but how many more generations is very much up in question.
It's all well and good saying action must need to be taken, but can the scientists here from all the disciplines actually tell the world's leaders too what those actions need to be?
I think slowly but surely we've had a problem we refer to it as silos, and various silos of disciplines across the social sciences as well as the biophysical sciences. We're slowly but surely reducing that. One of the big advantages of this conference is that we've had scientists from all disciplines seriously talking with one another. Now, I think in terms of Rio, what we need to stress is not that the politicians can solve all problems at the global level, but because there are many, many problems that need to be solved at national, regional, communities, very small-scale family. And we need to recognize that planetary problems, the ones that really are genuinely problems at a planet level, are serious, need to be taken care of, but they're not the only problems that we face. And we shouldn't be trying to get our major leaders to tackle small and medium-scale problems. We need to think about the multiple scales involved.
Because one of the big problems, inevitably, is that science is always surrounded by some uncertainty. There's never any total certainty in science.
But it's not uncertain that we are overusing the fisheries in the ocean. And it is not an action item that can be on any one national leader's agenda. So one of the really major problems of global change is what we're doing in the oceans.
Indeed. But of course, uncertainty gives some politicians, some leaders, an excuse for doing nothing.
Yes, but we need to make that very clear, that doing nothing is the wrong thing.
How important is it that whatever action is taken is underpinned by good science?
Very important. But we need, see, social science has also shown that there are many places where fisheries have been organized at small scale, but do have property rights and do really make a difference. There's a new article that's about to come out in PNAS that really looks at many of the co-managed fisheries in the subterranean ocean areas, and finds a lot of success as compared to government efforts. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm not very impressed with what the EU has done in terms of fisheries management, trying to manage with one system the Mediterranean and the Baltic. It's been a very, very serious failure, and we have very good scientific information about that.
Yes, indeed. Managing the global commons, the things we share, like fisheries and forests, is your speciality, of course.
But our forests are on land, and we have a lot more chance of fixing forests. We need to be working on that. But the one I'm very concerned about is ocean fisheries.
Right. Okay, but where do we go from here, though? I mean, if the politicians who were told 20 years ago all of this at the original Rio conference don't take heed of the warning that this conference will deliver to them, what happens?
Well, as I said, we may not have the generations of the future that we hope for, or the problems they'll face are just dramatic. We need to convince them that there are actions that can't be taken locally. There are lots that can be. But that's why it's a multi-scale problem. And they don't have to solve all the small-scale ones. They need to encourage development at small, medium, and large scale. But the planetary ones, they do. They must.
And we need to experiment, I guess, too. Try different things.
And we need to
experiment, try different solutions, try different things.
Sure. Because part of the problem is you have very complex systems, and your answers are not simple. And so you do have to experiment and test and learn and test and learn and test and learn.
And we've still got time to do that. Are you finally optimistic about Rio Plus 20? Do you think that finally the world will get it?
I'm very optimistic having attended this conference. I don't know whether or not I'm optimistic yet about Rio. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. We just need to convince the politicians that there are things they can do. They don't have to solve it all. Sometimes that's the message they've been receiving, and that's defeating. So our message needs to be, there are things at a planetary level that you really need to address. But don't worry about things lower. Worry about how you facilitate organization and action at lower levels.
Elinor Ostrom, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Daily Planet.
Fine. Thank you.
Now, as this is a science conference, there's a lot more going on than just the plenary sessions and the key events you're seeing on our webcast. For young scientists beginning their careers, conferences are a huge opportunity to show their work. All the big names on the platform will have been there in the past, standing by a poster trying to grab the attention of passers-by. David Caffrey has been to have a look.
I'm a forester by training, and I'm working here on dry lands in Uzbekistan, where we have the following situation. We have water as a limiting factor for growth, and salinity as well as a problem. And we have very shallow saline groundwater tables, which is limiting crop growth afterwards. So our idea would be to take out unproductive areas out of cropping, and instead of this, plant trees which are able to rely on the shallow groundwater table even though it's saline and survive like this. And so the water which is being saved could therefore be used in more productive areas for crop production.
My master's was on climate change, and I decided to look at some impacts of climate change in something that is actually very from a climatic perspective, very reliable to find in climate models and to establish in nature to estimate for the future. So I looked specifically at the Amazon drought and how we had two massive Amazon droughts in 2005 and 2010, and I wanted to know, is this going to happen more frequently? Is this going to happen? Is it going to become more intense in the future? So essentially, as you probably know from the Amazon, in 2005 and 2010, we had massive impacts for forests, for rivers. The Rio Negro went 4 meters below the normal average, and for climate we had 1.4 petagrams of carbon being put out by trees dying every year after the 2010 drought.
Keen to hear about the reversibility of sea level rise and what you're doing.
Yeah. So we were just wondering, people always talk about how sea level rise and never stop. So we were just wondering whether we could go back and, well, make sea level fall somehow. And so we tried things which are very, very idealized, in which we make CO2 drop, and then we see how sea level falls and how quick that is, and where we go in the end of it.
And how would sea level rises go back down?
Well, so what we look at is only the part which is due to the penetration of heat in the ocean. So when the ocean gets warmer, the ocean expands and sea level rises. And so if you decrease CO2 in the atmosphere, it gets cooler, and so the ocean will go back, so the sea level falls.
Well, good luck to them all. Now, how about pouring thousands of tons of iron filings into the ocean? Or sending a huge fleet of ships around the world to spray seawater into the atmosphere? Or giant mirrors in space to reflect the sun rays? They're all ideas for geoengineering, using technology to alter the way the planet works to try to tackle climate change. They're deeply controversial, of course, but just maybe some may work, some may even be necessary. To discuss the pros and cons of geoengineering, I'm joined by the two Tims, Tim Kruger from Oxford University and Professor Tim Lenton from Exeter. You guys have been holding a couple of sessions here at Planet Under Pressure about geoengineering. Tim Lenton, what sort of ideas are actually around, and how many of them, if any, are actually practical?
Well, there's a suite of ideas. They divide into methods to trying to get carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere out, and ones to counteract global warming by reflecting some more sunlight back to space. And within those two divisions, there must be at least 10 or so suggestions. My take on it would be that we are probably going to have to do some carbon dioxide removal in the second half of this century if we want to meet global targets like staying within 2 degrees of warming above pre-industrial. At the moment, the sunlight reflection methods are seen as broadly the riskier ones, and are often framed as being things to have in your back pocket should things get really bad. On the other hand, deploying them in what might be perceived an emergency situation might not be wise if they're untested and quite potentially effective and potent technologies.
Of course, they raise huge issues of governance. If you're doing something that affects the entire world, then any country that does it will be affecting all the other countries of the world. What sort of governance issues are raised by all of this?
I think the governance, the social and ethical issues are even more intractable than the technical issues associated with geoengineering. I think the first thing to note is that geoengineering is a very heterogeneous field. There are a vast array of different techniques that are out there. So the governance arrangements would need to reflect that. And we're starting work at Oxford on some work on that. But it needs to be a global conversation about this. It's not something that a few people can decide. Because,
it's important
as you say,
we start a conversation.
Absolutely. We need to start that conversation and get people participating in that. But it's a hugely complicated issue, and we're only beginning to start working on talking about the governance arrangements there.
Are there, Tim Lenton, actually just some engineering constraints which mean that while people might have these bright ideas, in practice it's just simply not possible to do it? So
absolutely. If you try to take these things to scale, which is of course the province or challenge of the engineer, you rapidly find that to make a global difference, say to the carbon balance of the planet, some of these technologies just won't go to scale because the engineering becomes intractable, too expensive, too energy expensive, or we're talking about creating global industries in a space of time that would be unprecedented. However, that's not true for everything. So on carbon removal, in my view, the most promising approaches would probably involve co-opting plants to do what they do anyway, take carbon out of the air for us, and then convert their biomass into longer-lived forms, be it charcoal to return to the soil known as biochar, or be it having a biomass energy but capturing the carbon dioxide from combustion.
But people do talk about, sometimes, don't they, people are developing the idea of like mechanical trees that suck
we
CO2
also
from
have the chemical, physical approaches to get carbon out of the air, but they really only carry a cost, and the benefits only come in terms of the climate benefits. Whereas if you can generate some biomass energy without it interfering with natural ecosystems and food production, which is the big if here, then at least you're getting some other useful commodity value, and you're spending some of that energy capturing the carbon, but not all of it. So in many ways, both scientifically but also economically, that's more of a goer.
Tim Kruger, is there actually any point in even thinking about anything like this? Because presumably the costs of doing this sort of geoengineering is going to be so hugely expensive that other solutions of behaviour change, of political change and so on will actually end up being a lot cheaper.
Well, prevention is certainly better than a cure, and what we should try and do is avoid having catastrophic climate change. But we can see from climate negotiations there may be a lack of political will. There may be a lack of technical ability to actually control the level of CO2 to a level which is consistent with a stable climate and healthy oceans. And we don't know what the climate response could be. We could get lucky, and when we have high levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, we don't get severe climate change, but we could also get severe climate change with a relatively small amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we really need to think of geoengineering a bit like an airbag for climate change. It's something you never want to use. It's a pretty unpleasant day if you do, but the time to be designing it is before you're skidding on the ice.
Critics always argue that geoengineering is taking a huge gamble with the Earth system itself, that there is, history teaches us that there will inevitably be some unintended consequences, and if you interfere with the planet in the way that geoengineers talk about interfering with the planet, then the unintended consequences could be fatal. Is it just simply not worth the risk?
Well, the trouble is the risk of continuing as we are doing is itself considerable, I would say, being someone who works very hard on trying to identify and even provide early warnings for so-called tipping points in the climate system. So we're already dealing with a huge risk management problem. Personally, I'll be delighted if we don't have to even think about using any geoengineering methods, but I think the first thing we do is, of course, reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, other warming agents. But in addition to that, I feel that the carbon removal methods may be necessary, and maybe I don't see an ethical problem, in fact, with combining those two approaches. I'd love it if we don't have to go down the path of deliberate sunlight reflection because of the unintended and unknown consequences.
Well, it's a truly important issue, and one that does, as you say, need to start with a serious conversation. Tim Kruger and Tim Lenton, thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, there's been a lot of talk at this conference about equality and about development. But a lot of the way you think about what's being discussed depends on where you come from and is coloured by your experience and ambitions for sustainable development. The view from the global south is inevitably very different from that from the north. Well, with me now is Professor Pauline Dube from the University of Botswana, who's convened a session here on global environmental change and sustainable development in least developed countries. Pauline, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You talk about vulnerabilities, and it's often people think about vulnerabilities in the developing world. Would you argue that the developed world is vulnerable too? Where is that? Why is that? Where does that come from?
I really think that we need to reframe our focus on vulnerability if we want to make progress. I think the developed world is actually the most vulnerable because they have tied all their economy towards fossil fuel energy and networked the whole world into that economy. And, you know, it's all very highly competitive. And the networking is for market, you know, to outreach, get more economic growth. But these sources of energies, in the first place, they are non-renewable. And there is indication that coal, maybe in 20 years' time, will run out of coal at a global scale. The same with oil. And then now we have this issue of degradation of planet Earth. So the economies of the developed world are very highly vulnerable if we don't find a solution. We are all very worried about this because we are also networked into it.
So is there something that the developing world, that the developed world can learn from the developing world?
Yes, it's true. However, the marketing power is so that our perceptions of development in the developing world is so much towards what we have seen. We are all thinking that the only way is to have this huge competitive free enterprise system. We can't easily think of alternatives. If you talk about renewable energies, talk about biomass, talk about solar energy, that is so abundant in the developing world. But we see them as just small man kind of energy, not enough to drive a whole economy.
Is that a matter then of changing the mindset of politicians in the developing world to recognize that there is a different way, a better way, than the one they see in the developed world?
It's not only the mindset, it's also the technology. Because the technologies in these alternative energy sources really is yet to develop to a stage where it can drive very big industry. That is one thing. So there is an element of investing in developing solar energy to an extent where you can run a manufacturing industry, and we haven't reached that stage. So, and then the developing world, because of limited resources, they don't want to experiment. They want something that has been tried and tested. So by the end, what is tried and tested is coal, it's oil. You don't want to go any other new area. So there are certain limitations in addition to just perceptions.
Do you get a sense that the world is beginning to recognize that there is a different way of doing things, that the old way is the wrong way, and that, you know, like messages from a conference like this would say, you know, we need to find a new way of sustainable development that is not growth towards the old model?
Yes, there is an indication that we are beginning to, you know, get awake, you know, that change is needed. We are basically being cornered, you know. We are reaching a stage where we cannot move anywhere further. And I think, however, we need to really think about this. If it's going to happen as an abrupt change, I have a feeling that it will really have a huge consequence on the developing world because our economies are so tied to the developed world. So a change that is not planned, it may really have a disaster in terms of the political stability of our own economies because we are not really, you know, independent economies at all. So hopefully there will be a lot more thinking about it. There are some indications that we are thinking about it. And the economic meltdown, we learn from that. You can see that the world is changing. I'm from a country where the economy is based on diamond. And diamond is just a stone. We give it value from social, it's a social constructed value, you know, on that stone. But when you come to the economic meltdown, people now focus on what is really basic in life. And the diamond market just collapses. You can see now that it's food, basic things. It's no more the jewelry and the diamond. So we can change if we want to. So there is an indication of possible changes. There's also a lot of debate about technologies, innovations, thinking about, what do you call it, indigenous knowledge systems.
Yeah, of which there's a considerable amount.
Yeah, where there's a considerable amount is a question of perceptions, a question of that the economy hasn't been looking at that direction at all. We've all been thinking about the big developed world system of doing things. But the other thing is, there is a lot of security now. We don't have that period where we used to have the socialism and all the threatening the Western country.
That's a subject I suspect for another time, unfortunately, because unfortunately, Pauline, we've run out of time. But Pauline Dube, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, there are dozens of sessions each day generating a veritable fizz of ideas where delegates debate, discuss and argue and occasionally agree. But one in particular has been positively effervescent. The World Cafe, it's called, and it's a truly innovative idea that's really got everybody going. So what is it and how does it work? Reed Evans is the person to know. Reed, hi.
Hi.
World Cafe, what is it then? What's happening at the World Cafe?
Well, the World Cafe is it's based on the idea that some of the best conversations happen sitting around, having a cup of coffee, with perhaps other people that you may not normally get a chance to speak with.
So how does it work?
Well, a lot of people come into the room. They're welcomed into the room by professional facilitators, and they're given a framing for about 5 minutes from experts about the topic that they're about to talk about and answer questions, try to find a common insight or a pattern that might emerge from a certain question. And they sit with people they don't know from different disciplines, cross-sector, and the facilitators ask them the question and ask them to focus on listening versus talking so that they can get an idea of what other people are bringing to the table. And then after about 20 minutes, after a question is asked, they are asked to get up and move to a different table, except for one person who stays and is the host of the table, gives them an introduction of what the previous discussion was, and then they go and move deeper, either to another question or they stay with the same question.
That's the process.
Yes.
So what questions have you been addressing at the conference here, and how has it gone?
Oh, it's gone incredibly well so far. It's very exciting. So the first day, I'll give you a couple of the questions. I make sure I had the questions. So the first day we had whole system solutions for sustainable development. What will it take was the topic. And the questions were, hold on.
Well, can you remember what came out of it? I mean, have you had bright ideas coming out of this
that
people hadn't thought of in the past?
You know, what I'd really like to tell you about is a pro-action cafe, which is a different method, and I'll tell you the outcomes of that, which is incredible. So pro-action cafe is where there are consultants. Everyone is a consultant in the room, and the other people bring projects, and everyone works on the projects together to bring them forward towards solutions. And we had amazing projects. We had a gentleman from a small town in Malawi who was looking towards whole systems energy solutions for his country that would be affordable. We had a young man from Nepal who had started an energy efficiency company who was trying to bring energy efficiency to scale in Nepal. We had a gentleman from Ghana who was trying to figure out, even though they have so much oil to produce, how are they going to shift to a renewable energy policy? And the room of consultants from all over the world, who some were energy experts in the field, they gave them a lot of expert advice in moving those projects forward.
So they were able to make more progress here by that way than they could have done in weeks and months of conventional ways of doing things.
Absolutely. Very exciting. Very exciting. And I'm very excited about today. We're going to have a longer session, a 3-hour session, focused on developing sustainability development goals. And this is sponsored by the United Nations Environment Program and the Global Change Programs. And it's focused on trying to figure out how science can inform the process of developing the sustainability development goals that are coming out of the Millennium Development Goals, and how that can infuse what happens at Rio Plus 20. It's very exciting.
Sounds like a great and exciting session. Reed Evans, thank you very much indeed for coming to the Daily Planet.
Thank you.
And that's it from the Daily Planet for today. Not the Lonely Planet, as I apparently said in this morning's show. One more day to go. Tomorrow is the climax of the Planet Under Pressure conference, and we'll be here to bring it all to you. But for now, goodbye.